Welcome to the Not Boring Tech Writer, a podcast sponsored by KnowledgeOwl. Together, we explore topics and hear from other writers to help inspire us, deepen our skills, and foster our distinctly not boring tech writing community. Hello, fellow not boring tech writers. I'm Kate Mueller, and this is one of our solo episodes where I share things I'm thinking about or working on. I'm recording this episode at the very beginning of February, soon after the Society for Technical Communications announcement of its bankruptcy and closure. While I was never involved with STC, I know many writers who were, and I suspect that loss will feel like a gaping hole in our community for some time. Let's all be a little bit kinder to each other, shall we? First up, what I'm working on. In my last solo episode, I talked about content types and how I was planning to use a massive content update for navigation and UI changes as a time to start more intentionally applying content type templates to my docs. I recorded that episode about 6 weeks ago, and I promised I'd give you updates along the way, so here's my update. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. While I've made a good amount of progress on my massive content update, I haven't focused on the content type work the way I thought I would. Of the 19 features subcategories in the support knowledge base, I updated 4 of them using some of those principles. On the plus side, I like the updates to those 4 subcategories. A couple of them were much older features, and the docs had become a bit unruly. And thinking about content types and user purpose and experience helped me begin the process of finally getting them into shape. That focus on user purpose helped me with some information architecture decisions. And I'm creating a consistent but mildly variable format that so far feels like a definite improvement. But I also realized that this is time-consuming work. I was overly optimistic about how large my existing project was and how much time the extra work would take. Let's be real, I was making an already large project even larger. And each minute that I spent working on that was a minute I didn't spend updating other docs to have accurate navigation steps or UI wording changes. So I've basically hit pause on the content type project for now. But my big takeaways from it are that I do like it, and I'd like to keep doing it. I just don't think now is the best time. I need to get through this big project first. As Janine and I talked about last episode, I'm basically setting aside my perfectionism and focusing on improving my docs right now in the ways that feel reasonable right now. Even though I know I want to do more, I'm choosing to focus on changes that are already a solid improvement for my readers. No big deal, just trying to practice the advice I dole out all the time. Reflecting on all of that has also prompted me to think more explicitly about how I prioritize work in my documentation. Since the support KB is largely product support documentation, I view these docs as an extension of our product, and I want the experience to feel as intuitive and helpful as our product does. Having a disconnect between what the product navigation and UI look like and what the docs say has caused me a fair amount of stress. So I'm basically deprioritizing the content type work until I feel the docs align more closely with the product. I'll still make some changes along the way, but it won't be the dedicated project I'd envisioned. What it's made me realize is that I'd like to define what our priorities in the docs are to help provide a decision-making framework for myself or others moving forward when big projects like this hit. That feels like it would remove some ambient stress and provide some guidance without being too strict or pedantic. I want something that's fairly loose, but also clear, a general framework, if you will. When I was talking about this with Mary Beth, I realized that what I want is our documentation's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, written in 1943, was about the categories of needs that human beings are motivated by. It's structured as a pyramid with the understanding that you can't begin to address a higher need until a lower need's been met. It starts with what are considered basic needs, which Maslow split into 2 categories: physiological needs like food, warmth, water, and rest, and safety needs for security and safety. Then it includes two categories of psychological needs. The first is belonging and love, which includes intimate relationships and friends. The second is esteem needs like prestige and a sense of accomplishment. At the very top of the pyramid is a single block for self-fulfillment, the self-actualization needs around achieving your full potential, including creative activities. Since I only came to this idea yesterday in conversation, I haven't crafted a full documentation hierarchy of needs yet, but I did discover that I'm not alone in thinking about documentation this way. MongoDB employed this same concept when they were redoing some of their docs. They published a blog post outlining their documentation's hierarchy of needs, which I'll share in the show notes. And if you or someone you know was part of the MongoDB team who did this work, please reach out. I'd love to have you on the pod. Anyway, their identified needs in order were: first, existence and basic needs, which included the tooling necessary to create and share the docs, as well as having actual content at all. Second was quality needs. In this case, they did some user research to define what quality meant to them, which included 3 points: be task or use case centric, come off as approachable, helpful, and informative, create emotions of confidence, excitement, and determination. The third level of their pyramid is called findability needs, which included both navigation and search. The fourth was experience needs, which includes finishing touches and small tweaks to improve both the author's experience and the reader's experience. And at the very top of their pyramid is contribution needs. Users wanted to be able to engage with the docs in meaningful ways. From their research, MongoDB described possible contribution needs as feeling that they can help docs improve, being able to report their own problems, and joining a community. It's an interesting exercise, and it's worth checking out their blog post. I'm not sure these would be the exact needs I'd use, but if I was using them, my priority decision that I just made could be the difference between quality needs versus findability needs. The accuracy of my docs reflecting the navigation options and UI elements is definitely a quality question. The content type work is more a mixture of quality to ensure that it's task or use case centric and findability to make sure it's organized in a way that makes sense. At any rate, I still have a lot of work to do on the navigation and UI updates. And of course, in the last couple weeks, we released additional changes. So I'm now redoing some work I already did too. But I'm sharing all of this because I promised you I would. And because I really want to normalize the fact that we often are juggling reactive docs updates and proactive docs updates. Here, I'm trying to balance the needs of reacting to the changes in the navigation UI with my own desire to proactively improve the docs using content types. Reactive updates often take priority. They're a bit more like putting out a fire. But we have to build in space to tackle those proactive, bigger projects too. Otherwise, we're just putting out fires forever and never building a new house. And before I mix any more metaphors, let's take a break. This episode is sponsored by KnowledgeOwl, your team's next knowledge-based solution. You don't have to be a technical wizard to use KnowledgeOwl. Our intuitive, robust features empower teammates of all feathers to spend more time on content and less time on administration. Learn more and sign up for a free 30-day trial at knowledgeowl.com. And we're back. I was thinking on the break, kind of back to my episode with Janine, which I hope you had as much fun listening to it as we had recording it. But there's an idea from that I find myself returning to. Well, it might be several ideas. I'm not entirely sure. But one of the ideas that struck a lingering note with me is the fact that as tech writers, we're constantly learning. And that constant learning, having to update our skills, learn new tools, whatever it might be, that keeps us humble. And it also keeps us closer to a new user or a new hire's mindset. And the reason I think I keep returning to this has something to do with the idea of feeling not technical enough. I suspect that there's really a superpower here, but it's just hidden underneath the wrong narrative. And I want to unpack that a little bit. So indulge me. One of the weird things about becoming a subject matter expert in anything is that you end up taking a certain amount of that knowledge for granted. You forget what it's like to not know some of those core building blocks. It becomes so familiar that it's almost an unconscious thing. You might call it unconscious competence, right? On one hand, this is part of the dread people sometimes express about asking an expert for advice or to answer a question. We don't want to look stupid in front of that person, and we often have to ask them to explain some of the things they assume we'll know. I'd like to suggest that this is, in part, also a tech writing superpower. The journey that we undertake every time we have to learn a new tool or domain or role or process is also the journey that our readers are coming to the docs for. Because we are ourselves continuously forced into this role of not knowing and starting from scratch, it makes it a little easier for us to write for others who are also in this role. We're closer to that experience, so it's easier for us to put ourselves in that headspace to write from. But it goes deeper than that. They're coming to our docs because they don't know. They're entering our docs searching for an answer for any number of reasons: curiosity, frustration, someone else asked and they didn't know how to answer, whatever. We want to provide them with the answer so that they can get back to what they were trying to do and be successful, whether that's a new hire wanting to know how to submit a request for paid time off, or a customer trying to figure out how to solve a problem with our product, or a developer trying to figure out how to build the integration that just got dropped into their lap. We want them to leave our docs victorious. A big part of their success, ultimately, is how well we can anticipate their needs to provide them what they need to answer the question. And sure, that's partially about knowing your user, what knowledge they come in with, what terminology they'll understand. But it's also about remaining empathetic to the motivations that sent them here. I remember a Write the Docs talk, though I've forgotten whose it was, so I'm so sorry, whoever you are. But the presenter said that we need to recognize that coming to the docs is an admission of failure, that someone couldn't figure something out on their own or buy the in app copy or whatever, and that we needed to recognize they were already coming to the docs with that sense of failure hanging over them. They were probably a bit impatient or irritated. And part of our job was to help them quickly get what they needed to be successful, kind of in spite of that failure or irritation or what have you. And for some reason, reflecting on my chat with Janine, this line keeps popping back into my head. I still think the sentiment is accurate for product or support documentation, but I also wonder a bit about the wording choice. Is it a failure when we ourselves don't know something and have to learn it so that we can teach it to others? Or is it just an admission of not knowing? If you're doing product documentation, you probably do think of it as a failure of the product that someone needs docs to figure it out. Or if you're doing internal documentation, you might think of it as a failure of the onboarding process or a manager that someone doesn't know the answer to this question already. But I suspect that the voice that tells us this is a failure is also the same voice that tells us that we aren't technical enough. And in this sense, Janine's suggestion to reframe it as, I don't know how to do this yet, is also a fantastic mantra to keep in mind as we try to center our readers' experiences. They don't know how to do this yet either. They're coming to the docs because they don't know how to do this yet. Our job is to try to help them know how to do it so that they can move on to the next thing. We don't judge them for not knowing. We assume not knowing as a starting place, and we build our docs from that assumption. We center empathy, basically. That practice totally is a superpower in our docs, but it's a superpower we need to use more in the opposite direction too, for ourselves. When I first started practicing meditation years and years ago, one of the instructions I received was to pay attention to the way I talked to myself. And once I did, I really quickly realized that I was much harsher with myself than I was with literally anyone else. Strangers, close friends, loved ones, coworkers. I had way higher expectations. The narrative I used for myself was so much more critical. Once I started realizing that this was a pattern, I was able to start noticing my own tone as I was talking to myself. And I began to pause and say to myself, how would you say this differently if you were talking to a close friend? And it became so much easier to approach myself with empathy and kindness. We often treat our readers or users with empathy and kindness, but we don't always treat ourselves that way. The criticism that we aren't technical enough is never a criticism that we would throw at a reader or a user, but we use it so quickly with ourselves. We assume that we should somehow magically know. So the next time you're feeling frustrated with yourself for not knowing more or not being technical enough or whatever, I want you to notice that. And then I want you to pause and say to yourself, how would I say this differently if I were writing it in a doc? I'm guessing you'd be a bit more empathetic, maybe a little bit less harsh or judgmental, probably a lot more focused on helping yourself learn what you need to learn to get from that place of not knowing to knowing. So try it. Let me know how it goes. The Not Boring Tech Writer is produced by the lovely humans at Astronomic Audio, with editing by Dylan, transcription by Alan, and post-production by Bean and Alex. Chad Timblin is our podcast head of operations. Our theme song is by Brightside Studio. Our artwork is by Bill Netherlands. You can check out KnowledgeOwl's products at knowledgeowl.com. And if you want to work with me on docs, on knowledge management coaching, on revamping an existing knowledge base, go to knowledgewithsass.com. That's knowledgewithsass.com. Until next time, I'm Kate Mueller, and you are the Not Boring Tech Writer.